Now, I've spent a lot of time trying to design the perfect drone. There's a lot of things that go into it, and most influencers that are giving you an opinion on what you should buy and not buy never really talk about the finer details. Oftentimes, they just say the drone looks cool or flies good, but they don't really get into it. But when it comes to professional video making with FPV, rather than just flying for a hobby, the devil is in the details. When you're recording with a camera, especially a small sensor camera, you're gonna pick up all those vibrations and wobbles and bobbles. Anyone coming from the camera world knows that when you handheld, it's gonna shake, it's gonna have some jitters to it. So you can put it on a tripod or use a gimbal or something like that. Obviously, that's what DJI does with their camera drones, is their cameras are on a fantastic gimbal. And it's because of that that most people don't know that drones have this problem. But with FPV drones, you don't have your camera on a gimbal, so all those vibrations and all those disturbances in flight will translate into the footage. Without getting into too much detail and getting off the topic of this video, you have to understand that every single thing on the FPV drone comes together to a totality of whether or not you're gonna have those vibrations in the footage. The motors, the props, the design of the frame, the mounting of all the hardware, the mounting of the flight controller, where your battery sits, how much weight is actually connected to the flight controller, and is it distributing all those vibrations in various different ways, the thickness of your carbon fiber, or what kind of silicone gummies are you using? Oh yeah, and not to forget, the actual tune of the drone in beta flight matters a lot as well. But you get my point. There's a large amount of things that goes into making a really high premium level filmmaking drone. I really think I struck gold with this design, and it's just flying like a dream, especially the new DJI O4 is, wow, it's just amazing. But we're not here to talk about this particular drone, albeit you can check it out on my Patreon. But what we're actually here to talk about is something that's a bit of a redheaded stepchild of FPV, and that is the controllers. One of the reasons why people put very little thought into the controllers is because it seems like the manufacturers also put very little thought into the controllers. These things are cheap. They're designed to be replaced every year. It's kind of like a phone, like the new one comes out and you get a new one. Every single year or every quarter, the next influencer in FPV will be telling you that this next controller is a game changer. This one is gonna make you so happy, 2025. But in reality, every single FPV controller is made to the lowest quality standard. I mean, these things are just above like a Mad Catz third-party Xbox controller. You have Radiomaster, who introduced the AG01 CNC gimbals, and those things were really game-changing because you went from plasticky, crappy feel to something that was pretty nice. And that was a welcomed addition to FPV because even though we spend all this time making our drones fly as best as we possibly can, but when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter how good you make your drone. If your controller sucks, then your flying is gonna suck as well. Not to mention, if something happens to your controller mid-flight and it disconnects, your drone is falling out of the air, and if you're in a precarious place, then you are SOL. Goodbye drone and goodbye dreams. Now, when I first stepped into FPV, the unanimous opinion was get the Radiomaster T16S with the AG01 gimbals. And I was quite happy with it, but it's pretty heavy. And most importantly, when I finally opened it up, because I had to switch the gimbals from left to right because I fly a different mode than most people, I just was uninspired by the insides. It was pretty cheap looking and there was a lot of empty space. The plastic was cheap. The cable routing was incredibly messy, and like the screws were so bad that if you weren't really careful, you were going to strip them. It was super annoying. And back then I didn't know anything about DIY or screws. I had to like buy them from Radiomaster at exorbitant prices. Of course, now I would just realize you need M2 screws and just get the hex head screws. Don't get the Phillips head. But all that put together made me feel not so confident in the controller. Also, just I don't like owning cheap crap. Then they came out with the Radiomaster Zorro, and even though I wasn't inspired by the T16S, I was very happy with the form factor because the T16 was huge and it kind of just made it a little clunky to carry around. All of the manufacturing in this controller is as cheap as possible. I mean, this is my friend Zorro, and this little thing right here gets loose really easily. We've tightened this thing down so many times, we've used glue, but it's a bad design. And like, in order to even get to it, you have to remove all the boards to screw it in. So it's a huge time dump, especially given the fact of just how little thought was put into people opening these things up. You open it up and you have to like kind of crink under it a little bit and pull out some wires and cords and get some screws. It is an absolute nightmare. And once you're inside, you realize just how cheap this thing was made. Next comes in the Jumper T20. Now this was personally my absolute all-time favorite. It's not as cheap as the Radiomaster Zorro, but I'm just gonna be straight with you. A lot of things are cheap on it. Like there's a heat sink in the back here that should be aluminum, but it's not. It's just plastic, so it's not a heat sink. I don't know why it's there to look cool. It can go up to 1 watt, but it does get pretty hot, and it doesn't give me that confidence I need to fly like on a mountain or something. Now, these do use the RDC 90 gimbals, which I personally really like. They're not as good as the AG01, but they're much cheaper, and they are definitely better than the stock version from Radiomaster. I mean, these things after a couple months will be drifting all over the place. Anyone who's played like on a PlayStation controller, Xbox controller, especially if it's cheap, you'll know like you don't have accuracy anymore when the controller starts to drift and it just feels gummy and not so good. And that matters when you're flying because you need to fly through a tiny little gap. Well, you need accuracy. Also, the form factor is really awesome. I love this form factor, not just for how comfortable it is, but also especially how easy it is to tote this thing around. I feel like this thing was designed with the user in mind, and I really appreciate that. But that being said, I have opened this thing up, and I can say that the insides are just about as cheap as the Radiomaster Zorro, albeit mine hasn't failed on me like my Zorro did. And that's when a new company reached out to me about 4 months ago, and they said, hey, we have these controllers, you interested in trying them? I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm pretty happy with my jumper, but okay, yeah, go ahead. They sent me a picture of it, and it is just a T16 clone. I mean, it's 1-for-1 a clone of the T16. Yes, it looks nice. It's got what looks to be AG01 gimbals, the CNC'd aluminum ones, and it looks nice, but it is just a clone of the T16. So I thought this is probably some cheap knockoff company. I'm not really interested, but whatever. Hey, free stuff, sure. But I did tell the guy I am going to give an honest review. You should expect that from me. So just fair warning, I'll accept your free stuff and maybe it's gonna be a funny video bashing you. And that was kind of the plan, which is also the reason why I never made a video on it, because I just wasn't interested. I stuck this thing on the shelf and I got busy with other things. But the other day, one of my students came back from college and he asked me what this was because he saw it on the shelf, and I was like, oh yeah, it's some radio, whatever. I picked it up and I kind of just started making fun of it. I'm like, come on, man, what's with these companies constantly copying each other? This thing's just a T16. Like, what's the reason for this existing? The Radiomaster T16S already exists and you can get the AG01 gimbals. There's just no reason that this thing should even exist other than just to steal market share from Radiomaster. Not that I have any love for Radiomaster. I mean, the way that they treated me was pretty terrible, but at the end of the day, as an end user, I really do just care about what's gonna help me to get the job done in FPV, so I still use the Radiomaster ELRS. They're the best that we have so far. But as I was making fun of it, I turned it around in the back and I looked at it and said, huh, that's interesting. They're not using the cheap Phillips head screws that every other manufacturer uses. They're actually using hex head, what looks to be like really nice screws that have some sort of coating on them to keep rust out. Opening this thing up is an absolute breeze. It takes 6 screws, 4 in the back that are 2mm hex. Then there is a 3mm at the top. Right off the bat, I just want to let you know this is awesome and not standard, but the back piece comes off completely free of cables and cords. Really, it's very welcome to someone who has to open up controllers a lot. But yeah, this is just unbelievably sexy. This is what I'm talking about, guys. This quality of manufacturing I have never seen before in an FPV radio. This is quality manufacturing. I mean, look at these capacitors right here. These are the good kind. These little becks, like, it's very nice. You can see the really nice traces, the very good copper tracing. This is really good design. You have daughter boards, you have really nice layout. I mean, look at the cable management. Really good. One big issue that the Zorro has is that you have like 4 or 5 different cables coming off these gimbals, and so it can kind of influence how you're doing things, especially on the throttle side, which is not spring loaded. But these are absolutely perfect. You do have to have this 1 wire going here, but that's it. With the Zorro, it's like 3 wires, and they definitely can cause interference. This is just good design all around, and also especially really good manufacturing. These look like nice PCBs. I'm very impressed by them. What's more is that the gimbals are made by them, and I can say the quality of the gimbals is like I've never seen before. Check this out. Like, these are really nice acrylic CNC or laser. I don't know how they actually cut these, but very nice design and very simple. These are much easier to adjust than the Radiomaster's ones and a lot more intuitive, albeit you can't adjust them from the front side, apparently. Although they do have the screw holes for those adjustments. I think they might be working on that because, you know, it's pretty complicated doing multiple sided adjustments. I'm quite happy though, just to get the adjustments right by opening it up, especially with how easy it is To remove the top plate, I mean, that's one big thing. Opening this thing up is not an absolute nightmare like it is for all of the other controllers I've ever opened. It's just like, boom, there you go. You can make your adjustments and put it right back together, like 5 minutes tops. The reason why this is so important is because once you get a controller in FPV, you can have 10, 20 different drones depending on what kind of person you are, and they could be expensive drones. When they're up in the air, this thing is the only lifeline between getting it home safely or losing it on a mountain. But especially if you're flying near people as a professional, if something happens or some little component or cheap capacitor blows, you just might be injuring someone and your career and possibly life is over. This does matter. And this is the first company that I've ever seen prove that they care about that risk. So I greatly appreciate it. It was so funny that I opened this up to laugh at the internals and I was just blown away and taken back by how good they were. This is the kind of direction that we want in FPV. Not a race to the bottom, not cheap crap being pumped out and replaced every year, but actually quality manufacturing designed to last and designed to fit the end user. Albeit, I'm not happy with the T16S form factor, but I can put on the screen right now, they're coming out with a T20 clone, and I think it's gonna be the all-time best, hands down, controller that's ever been manufactured for FPV, for both form factor and quality. And it's because of that that I'm actually going to sell them, not to make money, but mostly just to get them in the hands of Americans, because currently the manufacturer only sells in China. They don't sell in America, but I made a deal with them saying basically, try to give me a low price, and then I'll try to pass that saving on to the end user. I don't really have any other platforms to sell on, but if they're willing to pay the shipping, they can get one of these in their hands. And when it comes to something this nice, it's worth the extra juice. Okay, but let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room. This company is copying other companies' hard work, right? By copying the T16 and of course now by copying the T20. However, there's something to consider. You see, the person who designed this controller is the person who designed the T16 from Radiomaster. That's right, it's the same designer. I don't know the legal intricacies about whether or not he's allowed to do that or whatever. I don't know. All I know is that this designer is the same guy who designed the T16. And the reason why they designed this for their first controller was because, one, he knew this controller like the back of his hand, and two, he had a lot of the schematics already planned out. And like I said, I normally don't go in for cheap knockoffs, but I'm sorry, if you're gonna take the design of something like the T16 and make it this good, we're talking about, this is on a tier that the Radiomaster T16 couldn't even dream of. We're just so much more time, effort, money, and expertise went into making this thing. It cannot even be compared to the T16. It is such an upgrade. Now, I've seen some other reviewers bash this controller's plastic, and I have no idea what they're talking about. Honestly, it just makes me think that they're bought and paid for by Radiomaster because, listen, I'm not saying this plastic is miles better than everything else, but it's just about the same as every other controller, if not even a little bit better, because I think it's a bit thicker. That's one thing that you notice when you pick this up. It is heavier than all of the other T16S clones out there. I can't believe that these people that declare themselves FPV experts didn't open up the controller before giving a review about it. I mean, that's a really big point about the controller's viability as a product. HelloRadio.
Hello.
Pitch adjustment.
Okay.
So, basically, yeah, it's got voice commands that are pretty good. I mean, I can say HelloRadio,
Hello.
and it works just fine. Now, what you can actually do with that, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated because you kind of have to read the manual and set everything up, albeit when I'm gonna do it, I'll do it once and hopefully never have to do it again. I wanna have this thing adjust a servo to adjust the camera tilt whilst I'm in flight. So I'll say something like, HelloRadio, adjust camera 15 degrees up. And then it's gonna adjust the camera 15 degrees up. Another thing you could do with it is something like start and stop recording, or even open and close a flap if you wanted to drop an ordnance. I mean, sorry, no, just don't use it for that. I'm not gonna lie and say that that's a game-changing feature. I think it's pretty cool, and some people might think that, but personally me, it's kind of like whatever. I'm more happy about the quality of the manufacturing. That's what I'm really interested about in this controller. So like I said, I'm gonna put this thing up on my Patreon for a one-time sale kind of deal. So I'm not gonna recommend this controller given the price to someone who's new in FPV and doesn't really know if they wanna stay in FPV. I would recommend something like the cheaper version of the Jumper T20. It's pretty good and you can pick them up for a steal on whatever website you're getting them from. But if you're like me and drones have taken over your life, this is a no-brainer. The way that you control all the drones that you're gonna operate in the next 10 years will likely be powered by something of this quality if you're a smart person. Last but not least, and maybe most importantly, how do these things actually feel to fly out there in the field? I'm gonna be honest and tell you that if you're comparing them to the AG01 gimbals from Radiomaster, I think these are nicer, especially given the fact that they're LED'd and stuff like that. That's really cool. But the actual flight is pretty much a one-to-one with the AG01 gimbals from Radiomaster. But if you want not just quality gimbals, but also a quality radio and internals, this is all we have right now. I am so thankful to HelloRadio for bringing I'm so thankful to HelloRadio for bringing quality. Sorry, it keeps interrupting every time I say HelloRadio. In celebration for 10,000 subscribers, once that comes, I'm going to be doing a giveaway because they're going to send me the V14, which I'm all about. And so I'll be sending this off to one lucky, awesome subscriber as a thank you to everyone who subscribed to this channel and continued keeping the dream alive. Thank you so much, guys. This is 33rd Frame. I hope I educated you new flyers out there. 99% of the people on YouTube and FPV are going to say things that are not true for money. It's just the way that it is, and it's very unfortunate, but just have a blanket policy that whenever you see someone on YouTube trying to sell you a product, take it with a huge grain of salt. Anyways, I'm gonna let you go. I'll catch you guys next time. Some clever outro.